Hi guys from Pax Europiana, this time again from Kiev and here from the Kreshatik, the main street here from Maidan. I will talk now about economics because that's ultimately my profession. I'm a development consultant, I'm an expert for economic reform, and now I will talk about not NATO, not EU. That's also very important for economics because security matters very much for economic investments. Because who invests in a country where there's no basic security? That's why NATO matters a lot, because as you see today and in the press conferences of Zelensky, when there is the threat of war, a lot of people think, maybe not invest my money in such a country. So NATO matters. And the EU, of course, matters as well, because the EU is not just politics. It's a customs union, it's a currency union, it's a regulatory union, and this matters a lot for economics, obviously. The customs union, currency union, and also the regulatory framework. And that's why I also decided you cannot just economically reform countries with SME policy. I know all of that, and I know it very well. But you need also to touch all these political issues, because if countries are not allowed in NATO, EU or the Euro, then obviously it's deeply problematic, as you see in the case of Ukraine. Because since 30 years they are also reforming here, like all the countries of Southeastern Europe, the other 24 countries. But here we have much less progress, and it's very much connected with the rejection of NATO and EU perspective. And that makes all the difference, obviously. I give you a little bit of a view. What's also very good for economic development is good urban development. Don't have highways in the middle of streets. That's not good. So we need also to tackle the traffic issue here. But I hope you can hear me, and I will entertain you a little bit with economics this morning. So situation is, of course, the currency matters very much. That's why I make this campaign about the euro. I was working in Montenegro, Kosovo and Macedonia that are euro-backed or euro countries already. That's a huge difference if you invest in the same currency like the euro or the dollar or in some fragile thing. We had a major currency crisis in the eastern periphery of Europe in 2008, 2014, 2015 in Ukraine again. And in the case of war, obviously, there will be a currency shock again if we don't work and hinder that. So ultimately that's really very important. So the currency must always be one of the key topics. And then when you come from the currency and from the big issues, you can always then say the next thing is the trade system. The trade system, obviously, this country, this whole battle was for a trade system. For the integration, association, for the deep and comprehensive trade agreement. So customs situation, not only technically how less corruption there is and how much it's digitalized, the customs system integrated in European standards, that's obviously a big issue. And still here I was always complaining. For 4 years I was going by car over the borders there, and I said to them, please integrate your customs system like we do it in the Balkans. Now they say they will do it, but still they have a separate customs system, highly militarized and very deeply corrupt and problematic, and this is really a mess. And so we are in that situation. So then the trade system, obviously part of the customs system, it's not only the technical facilitation of the border, how to pay customs and how to control goods, but it's also very much, in what kind of trading system are you? Over there in the east, it's the Eurasian Union. That's the competing trade system. Here we have the European trade system. You have 70 free trade agreements. You are part of an internal market. Ukraine is more or less. They have still some quotas in agriculture, which we could also be more generous. But you are ultimately in that kind of European trading system since 2016 when the DCFTA became in force. And that's very meaningful and very important, obviously. So after the currency, of course, the customs and trade system, they matter very much, because with the trade system comes the regulatory alignment, the normative, the trade norms, the product norms, and you are no longer the Gosplan, the Soviet norms, but you are part of the EU norming system. And that, of course, matters hugely. And Ukraine has managed much of this transition already. More to come, and of course, as I argue in my op-ed, which comes tomorrow in Wiener Zeitung. That's one part of the Russian plan to change, of course, distract the policymakers. Here, McDonald's is already there. Some of these buildings, the Maidan. I will walk now to the train station and talk you through the economic situation of this country. And I've said the currency, and then the customs, and then the logical next important step is the revenue system of a country. That's also very important. That means most important revenue bringer of any country under European conditions must be the VAT system. It's the fairest and finest and best revenue bringer. Not these populist things, taxing income must also be, but not high, not progressive. I will explain all these things. So Ukraine has already a flat tax system, but it has a very complicated system of SME tax, and that's deeply problematic. Most important is to harmonize completely to the European VAT system and to have the same VAT system as in the European Union and then to implement it widely digitally, and then you have already better revenues. And then to have, and all countries here, they need very competitive tax rates because they are poor at the periphery out there. This is the mayor's house, very beautifully. I love it. Some luxury place up there, and that's beautiful. So since I say 20 years since I met Mr. Miklos in 2003, I say flat tax, but not 18 as they have. Obviously a country like this now needs to have a 10% like Bulgaria, Macedonia. There it was easy. Here I was also fighting for 4 years a big battle on the 10% tax system, because they have also a SME tax of 4% or 5%, and then they have 18 for companies and 1% war tax. So it's a bit messy. So it's not so clean and not so good, and then you have a lot of corruption obviously, because you have these arbitration incentives, and that's not what you want. You want to have clarity, 10% competitive in income and corporate, and then investment makes sense. Obviously it is always more risky in countries in the transition. They're still outside of NATO, there is business risk, there is the rule of law risk, the courts are corrupt, the property registers are not working as good, and you have a lot of politicians in all honeypots. So ultimately you need to be somehow more attractive in order to outweigh all these negatives, and then the taxation system is what countries can really do. Now we have globally 15. I think it was grandstanding. 10% it's a very good way, and then countries grow and catch up faster. It worked very well in the case of Bulgaria, Romania and Macedonia, and it should be also here 10% and VAT system, and then good property system. Property is of course in such countries, the property is of course the big investment. Here, for example, in the mayor's house is given all the licenses. The licenses are very important, the building licenses. So then we come to the whole topic of property registration, building licenses, urban planning. And that's a huge business, and everybody understands that, because in all transition countries, the big sector where people get rich, where money is parked and where everybody has needs, is obviously in construction. I mean, look around. It's a lot of sky towers here everywhere. This was a 100 million investment of the GUM, of one big oligarch. So you are in that kind of situation. And so you need, when you want to really improve a country, you need to tackle the property sector. It's very important to clean up the construction industry. First, how to do that? VAT for new apartments, very important. Incentivizes formality. Then you need also to have a competitive auctioning process, as they have here, for land. Land permits must be competitive. Then the whole permitting process must be digitally. That sounds all a bit technically, but it's important to have transparency in that sector. Also complete ownership transparency. Still here, this is an issue. In Macedonia, perfect. They have digitalized all single ownership of the country. That's very good. That is what you need to do. And once you have that sector under control, then it's already half of the economy much cleaner. and much of the money laundering is under control, and the situation is unbelievable better if that is already achieved. And that's very important in development economics, to have clarity in that sector of the construction, the land. That's most of the economy, because ultimately every business has something to do with the economic sector, also with the construction and land sector. Every business needs land, and so it's so important. Yeah, that's very clear. I will show you some of the other places here. One of the main streets to the opera. This is very nice restaurants here. You see all these old buildings now under renovation, new investors, not all of them so perfect, but it's moving forward. So that sector, very important, absolutely. Then in economic reform in post-Soviet countries, obviously, this one is a bit boring, regulatory affairs. That's simply basically copying what the EU has already done, or you go for one country like Poland or Croatia and you copy everything. Because it's not that you have to invent laws or so. They are all there. It's the 23rd or 24th country, depending who you want to count, which is doing the same reform process. And the EU laws are made as a kind of a framework for all countries. So you copy one of the countries which is relevant, and then it's good. For example, here, Ministry of Energy. Obviously, that's a huge sector. That's very important. But yeah, the regulatory I was talking about. So that's important. The digitalization, of course, and then the liberalization is part of the regulatory, because normally the EU has an open trading system, so that's very important. And then you have to privatize. Because why? These were state-owned economies. So all of them have big, like in the Ministry of Energy, for example here, what is the situation? A big hydropower company. The Dnipro is a big river. The communists built the dams. Now it's a state-owned company. It's a huge state-owned company. Or nuclear power stations. They have 4 of them in Ukraine. Yeah? A huge, partially privatized. If you're not ready for full privatization, go at least for 49% and sell it at the stock exchange. Ukraine has a stock exchange. It's absolutely here. Here, Naftogaz. That's another very big company. Very big company. Atom, nuclear, gas, and hydro. And they have others as well. I don't know all of them. Yeah, but start to sell them 49% at the stock exchange. It's not so complicated. We did it in Austria, and 49% of our bonds. It's a very easy process. It's not complicated. You have the stock exchange already working. It's in other countries, in Kosovo, Albania, there was no stock exchange. But here it's working. You put 49% off, sell it to the investing world. Suddenly you have a much better stock market. You have revenues to build highways. By the way, by the highways, build a tolling system. Ukraine has a lot of highways actually, but it's one with Kosovo, the only country where they have no tolling system. That means payment for the highways. Cannot understand that. Anyhow, that's for the privatization, but you can do the same also on the railway system. Yeah, to privatize 49% of the railway system. Ukraine has a big railway company, and it's actually quite a strong railway sector here, and you can sell 49% here. It's rather easy to do. So privatization, liberalization, regulatory affairs, revitalization of the stock market. Yeah, then we are already quite good in the economic reform agenda. Then of course you do what you call SME. SME policy is basically making sure that you have really a competitive market economy, that not the big ones or the political protected are very strong, but you have a real competitive environment. Everybody can get a license, everybody has access to public opportunities, yeah? The land, the licenses, the public space. You need one for a coffee shop, for example. So that's SME policy. Competitive marketplace for public opportunities. The tenders to be transparent, and suddenly you have much more companies who are really competing. Makes a lot of sense. And so that is the way for a competitive SME environment. Then you do, part of SME is also that you do innovation support. That's often kind of research support, that you also have the support of the technology sector. That means research sector. Companies can apply for research grants, but often also the entrepreneurship and innovation sector. That means that you give also support for certain sectors like tourism, like IT, startups and all these things. And you have the infrastructure. That means that other successful entrepreneurs or consultants are available to make management consultant, innovation consulting, write application as well for public funding, and to have a network where other, that's what they call infrastructure today, the innovation infrastructure. But it basically means that you have other people who are successful as well, and they learn from each other or co-invest in each other, or they know who could invest in such a startup. And then you create also a culture of entrepreneurship, a kind of a positive feeling, appreciation. You have media coverage about successful entrepreneurs, and you change the culture of perception. In post-socialist countries, obviously everybody thinks businessmen are corrupt, and often they are. So you need to change also that perception and get it done. And then you need also to change the traffic. It's a bit louder. And then also what you need to do is to educate the politicians that they're not too greedy. Because if the politician always asks with open hands for 10-15% from the foreign investors, then nobody comes, because that's much too expensive. So nobody wants to invest in, so if he has to pay or give the company 10% that's impossible. So you have to talk to the political elite, and the political elite has to be ready to make a cleaner way of doing business or funding their party politics or themselves. Yeah. If they all want to have apartments in construction permits, or shares in international companies, or suitcases full of money, yeah, where should be the profitability of any kind of business case with such huge costs on the side of the investor for the public approval of projects? Yeah? That's obviously just in very specific cases possible in a very lucrative mining or energy licenses. But even there, the compliance standards are so high today that most of the projects are not happening, because everybody runs away when the politicians raise their expectations so high. Then everybody runs away. Then you don't ask, oh, why is nobody investing in Eastern Europe? Okay. Who wants to be in a legal situation back at home when he invested somewhere, then had to pay bribes, and then was investigated and loses his very well-paid job, or has a criminal investigation back home? Nobody wants to risk that. And so most of the projects are just fantasies, because the expectations of the politicians are stuck in the past of the 1990s, and then the reality, simply such things are no longer possible, and then the complete mess is happening. Yeah, and then the houses are not renovated and the streets are not renovated, and because we are stuck because of high expectations of the domestic political elite in terms of their shares in international and domestic investments. Yeah, that's the whole topic of corruption, and I made many videos about that one already. But that's of course a big issue. And then the issue is the rule of law. Rule of law, not only the corrupt judges, but it's also the speed of public administration in making decisions, because that's also a huge thing. If you don't pay, nobody wants to take responsibility for a signature. Then you don't have decisions. You need enormous amount of decisions in major projects. Yeah? Environmental permit, construction permit, license to operate, whatever kind of legal requirement. If you have underpaid, incompetent, and on the one hand either corrupt and you don't want to pay, or uncorrupt and incompetent, and then nobody makes a decision, then you have huge delays or no decision at all, or the decisions are not good in quality, and then you cannot invest on bad public administration decisions. Nobody invests 100 million euros on a dubious, not clear fundament in terms of regulatory basis for what you do in a hydropower project or in an energy project this must be firm. Otherwise, you imagine you are investment representative of a fund, you come to a country, you say, hey, here's 100 million, I invest, and do some shady paperwork, and 3 years later this is all at the courts. Then the courts are maybe corrupt or incompetent as well, or the administration was before incompetent, and then the whole thing is on sand and basically lost. And then you lose your job and the investment is stranded, a lot of acrimony. Nobody wants to risk that. So that's why also a lot of things are not happening. Good. Yeah, what else? Yeah, the innovation infrastructure I have discussed, the big project privatizations and liberalization, the regulatory affairs. Yeah, basically that's already quite a lot of the things. Digitalization, a big topic, obviously. That's good. And also the public procurement, because huge part of all international investments, economic development is connected with state funding. So there must be transparency in public procurement. There must be clarity what needs to be done. Ukraine actually very good in that one. And then you have also a broader reach and more companies can participate. And that's also absolutely vital. It's part of the public administration reforms. That's why I call so often that Ukraine joins the Southeastern European Network of Public Administration Reform and so on, because there was huge amounts of invested and support already in that sector. And that's of course very important, yeah. And then, there's also many specific things about good education, dual education. That's very important to have technical education, university education. These are long-term very important factors to raise the human capital, to have a working labor market, to have not too strict employment rules. In Ukraine, for example, you have a lot of Soviet leftovers in the labor market legislation. Some of them might be reformed in the meantime, but that's very often you want to protect people employment contracts, but you make it very complicated to employ them, and then most of the people here are employed on consulting contracts. Yeah? For example, they look for people as waiters or as shop clerks to sell things, and they are then looking for consultants. That's not the idea that somebody who is working just in one shop as one employer is not a consultant. Obviously, it's a circumvention of a very strict labor market regulation. Then you come to the topic of the openness of the labor market, because most of our labor markets in Europe, for example, need a lot of labor now because of the demographics and after the Corona now, some recovery. So that's also a question, how you treat migrants, how you educate them, how to train them, how open is your labor market, how easy it is for expats to get permits. That's also a big thing. Yeah, let's come to the topic of natural resources, because they are also very important. Yeah, I talked about land, transparency in land, that's obviously very important. Land is also a very important natural resource in terms of agriculture, tourism, and all the related business opportunities, especially of course agriculture, mining, but also then mining. How you really manage your big natural resources, your carbon resources, gas and oil, but coal, and how you really also other mining opportunities. But that's also because all countries have something, some more, some less, some have used it already. But this is of course very important for indirect investors, because the big projects are always connected with that. A hydropower project, a mine, a cement factory in Albania, I know several of them, or other kind of construction material related investments. They really very much depend on how the process of giving such natural resources to an international or domestic investor is handled. If you don't handle them decently, And if you want a lot of bribes, of course that has to be calculated and also in the business case, because it's not for charity, the whole thing. If the politicians are very expensive, then it is of course very questionable to find investors, or they are often then trying to squeeze the margin on other sides, paying the workers very badly or treating the environment very badly to recover their profits. Yeah. That's of course the situation. Yeah, look how beautiful Kiev is. That's the Shevchenko Park again. And I'm walking here a bit in a different area. I've shown you some of it already. Today is Monday. I'm talking about economics, and of course that matters. Yeah. That matters very much. I call it all SME reform. You can call it FDI for indirect investment. You know, it's basically the same. It's good economic governance. Yeah. Clean public administration, competent and serious, and openness, transparency in the processes, and equality to access to such opportunities for all, and on a transparent basis, and also to treat investors seriously. One of my speeches is always treat the investors like your own investment, like your own capital, and treat the existing investors in a country better, because all this is owned by somebody. You know, it's a huge capital already there, and there's a lot of international investments already in all countries of the periphery, from Albania, Montenegro to Ukraine and Georgia. But very often they are not talking nicely about their experience, because their experience is not so nice. You have to make sure that your existing investors are happy. Listen to them. Where are problems in the permitting process? Where are problems in environmental inspection? Where are problems in the tax execution, implementation of tax laws? Where is corruption? Listen to them and change the laws, or fire the guys or reprimand them in the first stage and tell them that you're watching. Then if the politics are in this upward circle of, I call it public-private dialogue, where you really listen not to individual entrepreneurs in the terms of what is good for them and then you give it to them. No, not on an individual favor basis, but on an improvement of the public processes and the regulatory and in the implementation sphere. That's of course a huge difference, because otherwise you have collusion and corruption, or you have the improvement process of a really working economic system. That you want. This upward spiral of economic progress. And of course, that you need to install this kind of feedback loops with the international investors, but also with your domestic SME, or also with your domestic, in a way, oligarchs. Yeah? Because even the oligarchs are not all bad. They are just bad when they are just 5. Then it's an oligopoly, and they control the politics because they live off this kind of shadow profit margins which they make due to the closeness of politics which they have to fund. Yeah? But when you have big businessmen, they are not by nature oligarchs, yeah? But they might be very useful partners in big projects like steel works or like hydropower projects or big commercial centers, and then you listen to them and you entice them for more investment. It's good to be rich, in a sense, as a nation needs rich investors and successful, let's call them tycoons or so. The problem is when you have oligarchy, that means a few of them only, and they control huge chunks of the economy, and they control it by controlling the political access, and they block everybody else, and they make sure that that's of course wrong. Yeah? That's the nature of oligarchy, and because of the privatization process in the past, how it was done, quite murky, and the old elites basically not get ready, understandable, to give up their good life. And these old KGB elites or communist industrialists, they have taken over huge chunks of the economy after the end of communism, and they have then said, okay, with some brutality in the background, because that's learned in the KGB, they have then taken over and controlled by force significant parts of the industrial, financial and property sector of these countries. And of course they don't like then these ideas which I promote here, like openness, transparency, equality in access, European regulatory implementation and supervision, and tenders, They like tenders when they can control them, but not this transparency of equal opportunity, which is part of European SME process. And in this fight we are from Bulgaria to Ukraine. In some countries it works better, in some less, because obviously it's a big transformation which is happening, and 30 years is not a lot for that. We are of course much more successful in the countries where there is big supervision from the EU because of membership. In the countries where there is less, obviously the economic elite, the oligarch, the post-communist elite, which control the assets, that's what they did, because communism obviously is very much about control of assets and the commanding heights of the industry and of the society. The police apparatus and the big industries must be controlled. That's the idea of communism, very much so. And they did that. And so this kind of fight for the economic governance is ongoing. And in Ukraine, obviously, it's not lost, but it was very bad when the politics were drifting towards Russia from 2010 to 14 or before 2004. It was, of course, that system is what Russia is built on, that by physical, political force, the combination of both, threat because of political power and control of the physical, also mafia, they can control assets. And when you are not part of this elite and you don't play the game, in a sense, that's how they say, then you are of course a problem and you will be removed. Yeah? You can watch many of the Navalny videos, how very normal businessmen, they were successful paying, for example, taxes. Then comes the Siloviki of Moscow. They saw that this is good business, some mining company. Navalny makes the case very good, like in the textbooks of economics. And then it is happening that they are coming from the center, destroying the business and executing the guy and taking over the business because it was successful. Yeah, he did nothing wrong, he was just paying his taxes, and then he was gone. History, executed, killed for success. Yeah, and then some other guy, a relative of a general prosecutor, Mr. Chaika, is the video. You can watch it. So, good. This is the problem, and this fight we are in, and all over the periphery. Yeah, even from Malta to anywhere. Obviously, in the EU we will win it. We have won it mostly. And we need to build also stronger institutions in Europe. Today it's the day of Maastricht, and it's always a call that we have not completed the European unification process, and we need more power as well in economic governance on the European level, from central purchases of the gas contracts, a major source of corruption in Europe, to many other things which you need to achieve. But we will. We also have to do all these things, and Ukraine will be in the European Union, obviously. Yeah? Let's have no doubt here on this very important moment, and I will be very active on that one. Good. So I think a little economic talk and walk for Kiev. Beautiful place, full of opportunity. Treat your investors better, reform and join the European framework. It works, and it's not too complicated what I do as a profession, honestly. It's repetitive because in all countries it's the same. It's just, the further you come to the east, the more resistance you have from the institution and the more kind of counter pressure from Russia and from the Russian-backed oligarchs, and because they, of course, in such a big country, because the difference is compared to the smaller countries of the Balkans is that here you have you have a lot of people who are very rich already, and they like the system very much. Yeah? Here you have a lot of people who have three-digit millions. Yeah? You have even a number of billionaires here in Ukraine, because simply the economy of 40 million people and the amazing natural resources, they allow this capital accumulation. And then they, of course, control the politics in their region and the parliamentarians and the ministers. And then the resistance against what I do here in Ukraine is obviously then much higher than in other countries, where they are also much more interested, because the smaller countries, obviously, they are more interested in listening to European advisors. Here they have the tendency to know already everything, and if you're not rich, you're anyhow not serious, and minimum you must be from America or from Germany Austrian blah blah consultant. No good for Ukraine. Yeah, that's a bit the situation here. Yeah, that's why a lot of things need to be done still here, because you don't have this middle class based prosperity. You have in Kiev obviously a lot of rich people, because otherwise you can hardly live here, because it's quite expensive cities actually, because it's a big country. But you don't have this regional widespread SME prosperity which you need for such a country, and which also the people have deserved. Yeah? That is also a question about rights for the regions, federalism, competitive kind of regional development, using all the resources of a country because of this regional competition between each other, and that mobilizes everybody. It doesn't matter where he lives. Yeah? That's also very important, to have this kind of federal structure behind the whole economic system, because that's also on what competition is built up, and success of our systems in Austria, Germany is very much built on competition between regions, competition between municipalities, the right for self-governance in economic terms for these regions, and also then mobilizing and investing and trying to compete for investments. And that's a major factor as well in SME policy, this power to the regions and the competition between regions for people, for capital, for ideas. Then of course you in Ukraine, for political historic reasons, for these disasters of their policy of the Holodomor and the genocide by Stalin against the Ukrainian farming class, you have of course vast landscapes which are empty. It's of course a specific Ukrainian tragedy. And then you have only these big cities, and you have a real problem here in the rural development, in the prosperity out there. And obviously a lot of people then try to go to Poland, and there's 1 million of them already there and more to go. But okay, we are part of Europe. This will all happen because we have all the mechanism. These are all things which happen then once we are in the European Union here with Ukraine. And this is the debate I want to win now. And I will win. Good. Wish me luck. More to come. A little bit talk and walk about economics this morning. And I will keep you posted from Kiev. More to come. Thanks a lot for listening. Bye.